San Francisco Bay had swallowed engineers' confidence for years before anyone dared answer the question seriously. Could you actually bridge the Golden Gate? 12 men plunged with a section of scaffold beneath the Golden Gate Bridge when it broke loose. In seconds, that scaffold tore straight through a safety net that had already saved 19 lives. And this time, it couldn't save 10 of them. This is the story of the net beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, the men who owed their lives to it, and the single deadliest day in the bridge's construction. Picture San Francisco in the early 1930s. The Golden Gate Strait is a mile-wide gap of cold, churning water, fog, and currents so strong that engineers for years called the idea of bridging it impossible. Stand at the edge of that strait and you can feel why, the wind cutting sideways, the water moving in ways that seem to fight itself, the fog rolling in and swallowing the far shore whole so that, on some days, you couldn't even see across to where a bridge might land. For a long time, that was reason enough for serious engineers to shake their heads and walk away. Then along comes Joseph Strauss, a determined, driven chief engineer who'd spent his career building bridges and believed this one could be done too. He didn't just believe it quietly, either. He pushed, he planned. He argued the case until the impossible started to look merely difficult. Construction finally began in January of 1933, and over the next 4 years, ironworkers would climb higher and work more dangerously than almost any construction crew in American history. Steel towers would rise nearly 700 feet above the water, so tall that on foggy mornings the men working near the top couldn't see the water below or the men working near the bottom. Cables would be spun across a main span longer than any bridge built before, strand by strand, in a process that demanded precision even as the wind tried to undo it. And men would spend their days walking narrow beams with nothing but wind and fog between them and the water far below, trusting their footing and their nerve in equal measure, day after day, for years. Here's what makes this story remarkable, and it's easy to miss if you've only ever seen the bridge from a postcard. In the 1930s, the construction industry had a grim, almost accepted rule of thumb. For every $1 million spent on a major bridge project, you could expect one worker to die. That wasn't a scandal. That was just considered the cost of doing business. Big bridges killed people, and everyone from the engineers to the workers themselves more or less expected it, the way you'd expect bad weather on a long voyage. It was baked into the budget and the mindset alike, an unspoken tally that nobody thought to question. Joseph Strauss looked at that standard and decided he wasn't going to accept it. So he did something that, at the time, was almost unheard of in American bridge building. He ordered a massive safety net to be strung underneath the roadway work, extending out 10 feet wider than the structure on either side. A wide, forgiving buffer meant to catch a falling body along that soaring span. It cost about $130,000, real money in Depression-era America, when every dollar spent on a job site was scrutinized and stretched, and it existed for exactly one purpose: to catch anyone who fell. Now stop and think about that for a second. This was during the Great Depression, when construction budgets were tight and workers were, frankly, replaceable in the eyes of a lot of employers who could find another pair of hands waiting in line the next morning. And yet here's Strauss spending a small fortune on a safety measure that had no precedent on a project this size. Bridge builders just didn't do this. Falling was simply one of the risks you took when you signed up for the job, an accepted hazard passed down from one generation of ironworkers to the next, not something you engineered your way around. But the net worked. During the roadway work, 19 different workers plunged from above, and every single one of them was caught. They fell, sometimes from terrifying heights, the kind of fall that should have ended in tragedy by every historical precedent those men had grown up hearing about. And instead of meeting the water or the rocks below, they landed in a web of rope that flexed, absorbed the impact, and let them climb back out, shaken but alive, dusting themselves off and, more likely than not, heading right back up to finish the day's work. These men became part of an unofficial, entirely unwanted fraternity. They called themselves the Halfway to Hell Club, a grim, joking nickname for the exclusive group of guys who'd looked death in the eye on the way down and lived to talk about it over lunch the next day. The kind of dark humor that construction crews used to make peace with a job that could kill them. Word spread on the job site. If you fell and the net caught you, you were in the club. Nobody wanted to earn that membership. But if you had to fall off a bridge under construction, this was, without question, the bridge to do it on. For the roadway phase of construction, that net did exactly what Strauss designed it to do. It turned near-certain fatalities into survivable falls, and it turned the Golden Gate Bridge into a genuine outlier in construction safety history, a project that quietly rewrote what workers could expect to walk away from, which makes what happened on February 17, 1937, all the more devastating. By early 1937, the bridge was almost finished. The towers were up, the cables were spun, and crews were in the final stages of work on the roadway deck near the middle of the span, closing in on the finish line after 4 long years of labor. Workers were using a large movable scaffold, a platform suspended below the deck, to strip forms and finish concrete work as they moved along the underside of the bridge. It was routine work, the kind these crews had done many times by that point, the sort of task that, after years on the job, probably felt almost ordinary despite hanging in open air above the strait. Then, without warning, a section of scaffold broke loose from its supports. 12 men plunged with it. And here's the tragic detail that turned this from a bad accident into a catastrophe. The falling scaffold was heavy, and it hit the safety net with enough force and speed that it tore straight through it. The very net that had saved 19 lives simply wasn't built to survive the impact of an entire steel and wood scaffold crashing into it at once. 10 of the 12 men who fell died. It remains the single deadliest incident in the entire construction of the Golden Gate Bridge. Sit with the irony of that for a moment, because it's the whole heart of this story. The same bridge that pioneered a safety innovation decades ahead of its time, that saved 19 men who by all normal standards of 1930s construction should have died, also delivered its single worst tragedy when that same safety system was overwhelmed. Strauss's net wasn't a failure of imagination or a hollow gesture. It worked, again and again, quietly rewriting the odds for the men walking those beams. It just wasn't designed to catch something the size and weight of an entire falling scaffold with men on it. That's the brutal math of engineering. You build for the risks you can anticipate, and sometimes the world hands you one you didn't. The Golden Gate Bridge opened to the public a few months later, in the spring of 1937, and it became, almost instantly, one of the most photographed, most celebrated structures on Earth. That burnt orange color against the fog, those 2 towers rising up out of the strait, it's one of the most recognizable images in the country. Millions of people have walked or driven across it since, cameras in hand, barely giving a second thought to the steel beneath their feet. And here's the thing that gets me every time I think about this story. Almost none of them know that during construction, there was a net slung underneath the roadway work, and that 19 men owe their lives to it, and 10 men lost theirs when it couldn't hold. It's a hidden layer to a landmark that most of us think we already know everything about. You've seen the Golden Gate Bridge in 100 movies, 1,000 photos, on t-shirts and postcards and coffee mugs. But how many people walking across it today know they're standing above the site of both one of the greatest safety innovations in American construction history and one of its worst single-day tragedies? That's really what makes this bridge and this story so distinctly American in the best and most honest sense. It's not a story about a flawless triumph. It's a story about people trying to do something genuinely difficult and genuinely dangerous, having the courage to innovate when the industry standard said, just accept the deaths, and then having to reckon with the fact that even the best precautions have limits. Joseph Strauss didn't build a perfect system. He built a better one. 19 families got their husbands, their fathers, their sons back because of that net. 10 families didn't get that same outcome on one terrible February afternoon. Both of those things are true, and both of them are part of what the Golden Gate Bridge actually is, underneath the postcard image. So the next time you see a photo of that bridge, or if you're lucky enough to walk across it yourself, take a second to think about what once hung underneath the deck, and about the men who built it with their hands, one steel beam and one rivet at a time, 80-some years ago in fog and wind, hundreds of feet above the water. Some of them fell. 19 of them got to walk away and tell the story. And the bridge still stands today as a reminder that real progress, the kind that actually saves lives, usually starts with someone willing to spend the money and take the risk of doing things differently. If you like stories like this, ones that dig up the parts of American history hiding in plain sight, stick around and subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.